April 18th, 1943. Lincolnshire, England. The early morning fog hung thick over RAF Coningsby as Flight Lieutenant Thomas Winters checked the fuel gauges of his Mosquito fighter bomber for the third time. At 27,000 feet, with temperatures far below freezing, and German night fighters prowling the skies, his unconventional modifications would either save his squadron or condemn them to fiery deaths. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how one pilot's desperate gamble with forbidden chemistry changed the course of aerial warfare and saved countless Allied lives during the darkest days of World War II. The spring of 1943 marked a critical juncture in the air war over Europe. The Allied bombing campaign against Nazi Germany was faltering under catastrophic losses. The Luftwaffe's integrated air defense system, anchored by the Kammhuber Line, a sophisticated network of radar stations, searchlights, and night fighters, was exacting a terrible toll on Allied bomber formations. Squadron leader James Bartlett studied the latest casualty reports with growing despair. Seated in the cramped briefing room at RAF Coningsby, he ran his hand through his thinning brown hair, a habit that had intensified with each passing week. 38 bombers lost in the last Hamburg raid, 42 over Berlin the week before, 296 men gone. "We can't sustain these losses, Winters," Bartlett said, looking up at Flight Lieutenant Thomas Winters, who stood by the map table. "Air Ministry expects us to increase sorties while our squadrons are being decimated." Winters, a slender man with piercing blue eyes that belied his 29 years, nodded grimly. Unlike most of the squadron, he wasn't just a pilot. Before the war, he had been completing his doctorate in chemical engineering at Cambridge when duty called. "The Germans have perfected their radar network," Winters replied, tracing his finger along the defensive line on the map. "Freya for early warning, Würzburg for precision tracking, and Liechtenstein airborne radar for their night fighters. They see our boys coming from 100 miles out." Group Captain William Harrington, the station commander, entered the room, his normally rigid posture showing subtle signs of fatigue. At 47, Harrington represented the old guard of the RAF, disciplined by the book, with little patience for unconventional thinking. "Gentlemen," Harrington announced, "orders from Bomber Command. We're to provide Mosquito Pathfinder support for a major raid on the Ruhr Valley 3 nights from now. 230 bombers, Lancaster heavies." The room fell silent. The Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, was perhaps the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. "With respect, sir," Winters said carefully, "at current loss rates, we'll be sacrificing at least 50 aircraft and 350 men." Harrington's expression hardened. "Our duty isn't to question orders, Flight Lieutenant. It's to execute them." He paused, then added more quietly, "however impossible they might seem." After the briefing, Winters walked across the airfield toward the hangars, his mind racing. The technical specifications of the German radar systems had been his obsession for months. Würzburg radar operated at 560 MHz with a wavelength of approximately 53 centimeters. Freya used 125 MHz with a wavelength of about 240 centimeters. Both were remarkably effective against conventional aircraft. Inside Hangar 3, Technical Sergeant Walter Cooper was supervising maintenance on the squadron's de Havilland Mosquitoes. Cooper, a former mechanic from Birmingham, with hands perpetually stained with engine oil and a vocabulary colorfully decorated with profanity, looked up as Winters approached. "What brings you to my domain, sir? Another one of your mad scientist questions?" Cooper asked, wiping his hands on an already soiled rag. "Something like that, Cooper," Winters replied, his eyes fixed on the elegant wooden airframe of the nearest Mosquito. "What do you know about fuel additives?" Cooper raised an eyebrow. "Enough to know that if you put anything unauthorized in these engines, the engineering officer will have you shot at dawn." Winters smiled thinly. "And if it could save the lives of hundreds of bomber crews, then make sure you don't get caught," Cooper replied without hesitation. That evening, Winters sat alone in his quarters, his desk covered with technical papers, chemical formulas, and radar schematics. The solution had been nagging at his mind for weeks now, ever since he'd witnessed a peculiar incident during a bombing raid 2 months earlier. During that mission, a Lancaster bomber with a damaged fuel tank had leaked a mixture of aviation fuel and coolant into the air. For nearly 30 minutes, German radar operators had reported difficulty tracking the aircraft. The incident had been logged as a technical malfunction and forgotten by everyone except Winters. The chemistry was complex but theoretically sound. Certain compounds, when vaporized at high altitude, could absorb or scatter specific radar wavelengths. The difficulty lay in creating a stable mixture that wouldn't destroy the aircraft's engines in the process. A knock at his door interrupted his calculations. "Enter," he called, hastily covering his most sensitive notes. Flight Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, one of the few female officers at Coningsby and a scientific intelligence liaison from Bletchley Park, stepped into the room. With short dark hair and a perpetually serious expression, Mitchell had been sent to RAF stations to gather technical intelligence from returning bomber crews. "Working late again, Winters?" she asked, nodding toward his papers. "Just some personal research," he replied carefully. Mitchell closed the door behind her. "Personal research involving German radar frequencies? That's an interesting hobby." Winters stiffened. "How did you—" "I've been watching you," she said simply. "Your questions to returning crews about German radar, your requisitions for technical manuals, 3 separate requests for meteorological data at various altitudes over the continent." "Am I under investigation?" he asked quietly. Mitchell shook her head. "Quite the opposite. I've been authorized to offer assistance with whatever you're developing. Bomber Command is desperate for any advantage." After a moment's hesitation, Winters nodded toward a chair. "What do you know about dipole molecules and electromagnetic absorption?" Mitchell smiled slightly. "I studied physics at Oxford before the war. Try me." For the next 3 hours, they worked through the calculations together. Mitchell's insights into the latest intelligence on German radar systems proved invaluable, filling crucial gaps in Winters' knowledge. "The mixture would need to be introduced into the fuel system gradually," Winters explained, sketching a diagram. "Too much at once would clog the injectors or potentially cause engine failure." "And the exhaust would create a dispersed cloud of these particles?" Mitchell asked, following his logic. "Precisely, at high altitude. They should create a field that absorbs or scatters radar waves within the frequency ranges used by Würzburg and Liechtenstein systems." Mitchell studied the chemical formula Winters had developed. "This compound here, it's highly regulated. You'll never get official approval to use it as a fuel additive." "I know," Winters said grimly. "That's why I haven't submitted an official proposal." "You're planning to do this without authorization," Mitchell said. It wasn't a question. 230 bombers, 1,600 men. If I'm right, this could reduce our losses by half or more. Mitchell was silent for a long moment. "You'll need access to the base laboratory and requisitions for chemicals that will raise questions." "Yes." She nodded decisively. "I can help with that. My clearance gives me requisition authority for intelligence research purposes." Winters looked at her with surprise. "Why would you risk your career for this?" Mitchell's expression darkened. "My brother was a navigator on a Lancaster, shot down over Hamburg last month." She met his eyes. "No body recovered." The following morning, Winters sought out Flying Officer David Cohen, the squadron's navigation specialist. A former mathematics professor from Manchester with a methodical mind, Cohen had earned the nickname the Calculator for his precision. "I need your help with a special operation," Winters said as they walked between hangars. Strictly unofficial. Cohen glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "What kind of operation?" "One that requires calculating exact dispersal patterns of particulate matter at various altitudes, temperatures, and wind speeds." Cohen stopped walking. "This sounds suspiciously like the kind of unauthorized experiment that ends with a court-martial." "It is," Winters admitted. "It's also potentially the breakthrough we need against German radar." Cohen considered this. "Explain the physics." For the next 20 minutes, Winters outlined his theory, speaking in hushed tones as ground crew and pilots passed by. Cohen listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about molecular behavior and atmospheric conditions. Your calculations for particulate dispersion are off by approximately 22%, Cohen finally said. You've underestimated the effect of temperature on molecular excitation at high altitude. Winters grinned. So you'll help? Cohen sighed. Someone has to make sure you don't poison half the squadron with whatever concoction you're brewing. Over the next 48 hours, their unauthorized project took shape in the base's rarely used laboratory facility. Mitchell procured the necessary chemicals through her intelligence requisition authority. Cooper, bringing his practical mechanical knowledge, designed a simple but effective system to introduce the additive mixture into the Mosquito's fuel lines at a controlled rate. This valve here, Cooper explained, showing a small brass fitting he had fabricated, will allow the pilot to control the mixture flow. Too much and you'll foul the engines, too little and you won't get the radar effect. How many aircraft can we modify before tomorrow night's mission? Winters asked. Cooper scratched his chin thoughtfully. With the parts I've scraped together, 6 at most, and that's assuming we work through the night. Winters nodded. 6 will have to do for the initial test. As they finalized preparations, Cohen approached with a stack of navigation charts. I've calculated optimal flight paths to maximize the effectiveness of your radar-absorbing cloud. The Pathfinder Mosquitoes will need to fly in this specific formation, approximately 1,000 yards apart, at 27,000 feet. That's higher than our normal Pathfinder operations, Winters noted. Yes, but necessary for proper dispersion. Temperature and pressure at that altitude will create an ideal environment for the particulate cloud to form effectively. The door to the laboratory suddenly opened, and Group Captain Harrington stepped in. The 4 conspirators froze. Harrington surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. The chemical equipment, the modified fuel system components, the navigation charts. I believe you have some explaining to do, Flight Lieutenant Winters, he said coldly. Winters straightened to attention. Sir, I can explain. I certainly hope so. Because this has all the appearances of unauthorized experimentation with aircraft fuel systems, which, I need hardly remind you, is a court-martial offense. Mitchell stepped forward. Group Captain, I authorized this research under my intelligence directive from Bletchley Park. Harrington's eyebrows rose. Did you indeed? And does your directive extend to modifying operational aircraft without engineering approval? No, sir, Mitchell admitted. Sir, Winters said, we've developed a method that may significantly reduce our vulnerability to German radar. Given the urgency of tomorrow's operation and the expected casualties, we felt you could ignore regulations, proper testing protocols, and the entire chain of command, Harrington interrupted. Is that it? Cooper, never one for tact, spoke up. With respect, sir, while these fine officers are discussing protocols, more boys are dying every night. A tense silence fell. Harrington's face revealed nothing as he walked slowly around the laboratory, examining their work. Finally, he stopped in front of Winters. Precisely how does this system work? He asked quietly. For the next 20 minutes, Winters explained their theory, the chemical composition of the additive, and how it would create a radar-absorbing cloud that could shield bomber formations. Harrington listened without interruption, asking only occasional clarifying questions. When Winters finished, Harrington was silent for a long moment. You realize, and he finally said, that if you're wrong about this, you're not just risking your own aircraft, you're potentially endangering the entire bomber stream that will be following your Pathfinder guidance. Yes, sir, Winters acknowledged, but our calculations suggest— I'm not interested in your calculations at this moment, Flight Lieutenant, Harrington said sharply. I'm interested in your certainty. Are you willing to bet 1,600 lives on this untested theory? Winters met his commander's gaze steadily. Sir, they're already betting their lives every night against a system that's killing them by the hundreds. Harrington held his gaze for several seconds, then looked around at the other 3. You're all prepared to stake your careers on this. They nodded in unison. After another long silence, Harrington said, 6 aircraft, you said? Yes, sir, Cooper replied. That's all we can modify by tomorrow. Harrington checked his watch. You have 18 hours until the mission briefing. I want to see a test of this system on a single aircraft in 8 hours. If, and only if, that test is successful, you may proceed with the others. Winters blinked in surprise. You're authorizing this, sir? I'm not authorizing anything officially, Harrington replied carefully, but I'm not stopping it either. I will observe your test personally. If there's the slightest indication of engine performance issues, this ends immediately. Understood. Yes, sir, thank you, sir. As Harrington turned to leave, he paused at the door. And Winters? Sir? If this works, it could save thousands of lives. If it fails. He left the sentence unfinished. I understand the stakes, sir. After Harrington departed, the four conspirators looked at each other in stunned silence. Well, Cooper finally said, what are you lot staring at? We've got work to do. The test flight took place at dawn. Winters piloted the modified Mosquito himself, with Cohen as navigator. Mitchell and Cooper monitored from the ground with Harrington, all three equipped with headsets to maintain radio contact. Approaching 20,000 feet, Winters reported. Engine performance normal, preparing to activate the additive system. Proceed, Harrington's voice crackled through the radio. Winters nodded to Cohen, who reached forward and carefully opened the control valve they had installed. There was a momentary fluctuation in the engine note, then it stabilized. Additive flowing, Winters confirmed. Minor power fluctuation, now stabilized. Continuing climb to test altitude. At 27,000 feet, with the early morning sun casting long shadows across the English countryside below, Winters leveled the aircraft. Beginning test pattern, he announced, banking the Mosquito into a wide turn. On the ground, Mitchell was monitoring a modified radar set, adjusted to approximate the frequencies used by German systems. Radar signature is changing, she reported. Signal strength decreasing by approximately 40%, 50%, nearly 60% reduction. Any effect on engine performance? Harrington asked Cooper. Running a touch hotter than normal, but well within tolerances, the mechanic replied, studying the telemetry they were receiving. In the air, Winters and Cohen exchanged excited glances. It's working, Cohen said. Calculations were correct. Not bad for a mathematician and a chemist, Winters replied with a grin. After completing the test pattern, Winters closed the additive valve and began their descent. Radar signature returning to normal, Mitchell confirmed. As they taxied back to the hangar after landing, Harrington was waiting. His expression gave nothing away as Winters and Cohen climbed down from the aircraft. Well? Winters asked anxiously. The radar effect is significant, Harrington acknowledged. More than I expected, frankly. Then we can proceed with modifying the other aircraft, Cohen asked. Harrington nodded slowly. Yes, but I want hourly updates on your progress, and each aircraft must undergo a ground test before being cleared. As the day progressed, the small team worked feverishly to modify the remaining 5 Mosquitoes. By late afternoon, all 6 aircraft had been fitted with the additive system and tested. The strain of the non-stop work was showing on all their faces, but there was also a palpable sense of anticipation. The mission briefing was scheduled for 1900 hours. As pilots and navigators from the Mosquito Pathfinder Squadron filed into the briefing room, they were unaware of the secret modification made to 6 of their aircraft. Harrington conducted the briefing, outlining the target, the Krupp Steelworks in Essen, a vital component of Germany's war industry. This raid represents one of the largest commitments of resources to date, Harrington explained, indicating the planned bomber route on the large map. 230 Lancaster and Halifax heavy bombers will follow the Pathfinder force, which will mark the target with flares. He then announced the crew assignments, placing Winters as the lead Pathfinder with Cohen as his navigator. The other modified aircraft were assigned experienced crews, though none were told about the special equipment they would be carrying. After the main briefing concluded, the 6 selected crews were asked to remain behind. Once the room had cleared, Harrington nodded to Winters. Gentlemen, Winters began, your aircraft have been modified with an experimental system designed to reduce our vulnerability to enemy radar. The technical details are classified, but you need to understand how to operate it. He explained the simple valve control and the importance of activating it only once they reached 27,000 feet. He also warned them about the slight engine performance changes they might experience. Any questions? Winters asked after finishing his explanation. Flying Officer Robert Jenkins, an Australian with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, raised his hand. Just to be clear, sir, this hasn't been approved by Bomber Command. It has received appropriate authorization, Harrington interjected smoothly, not quite answering the question. What we're doing tonight could change the course of the air war, Winters added, but it must remain absolutely secret, even after we return. As the crews dispersed to prepare for the night's mission, Mitchell approached Winters. I've been monitoring Enigma decrypts all day, she said in a low voice. German night fighter squadrons are on high alert. They're expecting us. Winters nodded grimly. All the more reason this needs to work. Darkness fell across RAF Coningsby as the air crews made their final preparations. The distant thunder of Lancaster bombers starting up could be heard from neighbouring airfields. Hundreds of Merlin engines roaring to life across Lincolnshire. In the ready room, Winters found Cooper making last-minute adjustments to a fuel valve. Slight modification, the mechanic explained, should give you better control over the flow rate. Any regrets about getting involved in this madness? Winters asked. Cooper snorted. Engineers are supposed to solve problems, that's all we're doing. Outside, the 6 modified Mosquitoes were being fueled. Mitchell supervised the process personally, ensuring the special additive reservoir on each aircraft was filled with the precise mixture they had developed. Cohen approached, navigation charts tucked under his arm. Weather report just came in. Clear skies over the target, light winds from the northwest. Ideal conditions for our purposes. At 21:30 hours, the Pathfinder force began taking off. Winters and Cohen were first, their Mosquito lifting gracefully into the night sky. One by one, the other aircraft followed, forming up as they set course for the Dutch coast. Navigator to pilot, Cohen's voice came through the intercom as they crossed the English coastline. We should activate the system in approximately 17 minutes, when we reach the designated altitude. Understood, Winters replied, his eyes scanning the dark sky for any sign of enemy aircraft. The climb to 27,000 feet was uneventful. As they leveled off, Winters checked that the other 5 Mosquitoes were in their planned formation. Activating the system now, he announced on the squadron frequency, reaching for the control valve. The other crews acknowledged and followed suit. Almost immediately, there was a subtle change in the engine note, a slightly rougher timbre that nevertheless remained within normal parameters. Check your engine temperatures, Winters instructed. Remember to adjust your mixture if you see any significant increase. For several tense minutes, they continued on course, wondering if their radical experiment was having any effect. The answer came as they approached the Dutch-German border. Lead Pathfinder, this is Mosquito 3, came the voice of Jenkins. Look at your 3 o'clock, about 2 miles out. Searchlights. Winters turned his head. In the distance, powerful beams of light were sweeping the sky, but they were moving randomly, not converging on any target. They can't find the bomber stream, Cohen whispered, the realization dawning. As they continued deeper into German airspace, the evidence mounted. Searchlight batteries that should have illuminated their approach were sweeping uselessly. Flak batteries fired sporadically, rather than in concentrated barrages. It's working, Winters said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. Their radar can't get a fix on us or the main force. Behind them, the vast bomber stream, hundreds of heavy bombers carrying thousands of tons of bombs, followed the path cleared by the Mosquitoes and their invisible protective cloud. Lieutenant Klaus Weber, of the Luftwaffe's Nachtjagdgeschwader 4, sat in the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter, increasingly frustrated. Based at an airfield near Arnhem, his squadron had been alerted to an incoming bomber stream, but his Liechtenstein airborne radar was showing only intermittent, ghostly returns. Anything on visual? He asked his radar operator. Feldwebel Müller. Nothing, Herr Leutnant, Müller replied, his face illuminated by the green glow of the radar screen. The signals keep fading in and out. I've never seen anything like it. Weber switched frequencies on his radio. Control, this is Red 7. We are having difficulties with radar contact. Request vector to bomber stream. The response was equally confused. Red 7, ground radar is also experiencing anomalies. Last reliable contact showed enemy aircraft bearing 085, altitude approximately 8,000 meters. Weber banked his aircraft toward the indicated heading, straining his eyes to see through the darkness. The night was clear, stars visible above. They should have been able to spot the bomber stream by now, especially with their exhaust flames visible against the night sky. "It's as if they're flying ghosts tonight," Muller muttered. As the Mosquito Pathfinders approached the target area, Winters could see that their deception was continuing to work. The normally fearsome defenses of the Ruhr Valley, the most heavily protected airspace in Europe, were reacting with uncharacteristic confusion. "Beginning target marking procedure," Winters announced as they reached the initial point. The 6 Mosquitoes deployed their target indicators, bright-colored flares that would guide the following bomber force. Below, the vast industrial complex of the Krupp Works came into view, its outlines just visible in the moonlight. "Primary target marked," Cohen confirmed as the flares ignited, casting an eerie green glow over the target area. Almost immediately, searchlights began to converge on the visible flares, and flak batteries opened fire, but their aim was uncoordinated, lacking the radar guidance that normally made them so deadly. "Mosquito formation, complete your marking runs and prepare to withdraw," Winters ordered. "Maintain altitude and additive flow until we're clear of the heavy defenses." As the Pathfinders completed their mission, the first wave of Lancaster bombers arrived over the target. Without the usual harassment from night fighters, they were able to make precise bombing runs. The accuracy of their attack would prove to be unprecedented. The return journey was tense, but remarkably free of incident. Only as they approached the English coast did Winters finally order the additive system to be shut down. By then, the mission had achieved something extraordinary. The entire bomber force had traversed the most heavily defended airspace in Europe, with losses far below the norm. At the debriefing the following morning, the statistics were astonishing. Of the 230 bombers dispatched, only 7 had been lost, a loss rate of just 3% compared to the recent average of 15 to 20%. Group Captain Harrington presided over a separate private debriefing with Winters, Cohen, Mitchell, and Cooper. "The results are beyond anything we could have anticipated," Harrington acknowledged. "Reconnaissance photographs show the Krupp Works has sustained major damage. Bomber Command is calling it one of the most successful raids of the war thus far." "What happens now, sir?" Winters asked. Harrington's expression grew serious. "That's where things become complicated. I've received inquiries from Air Ministry about our unorthodox navigation techniques. Word travels fast." "Will we be allowed to continue using the system?" Cohen asked. "That depends," Harrington replied, "on how we present this to the higher echelons. If we simply reveal that we've been conducting unauthorized chemical experiments with aircraft fuel, the reaction will be predictably severe." "But the results speak for themselves," Cooper protested. "Indeed they do," Harrington agreed. "Which is why I've taken the liberty of preparing an official report that characterizes this as a carefully planned trial of a new radar countermeasure, developed through proper channels." The 4 conspirators exchanged surprised glances. "You're covering for us, sir?" Winters asked. "I'm ensuring that a valuable tactical innovation isn't lost to bureaucratic red tape," Harrington corrected. "The report has been backdated and includes authorized signatures from the appropriate departments. As far as the official record is concerned, this was a sanctioned operation from the beginning." Mitchell looked troubled. "That's falsifying official documents, sir." "It is," Harrington acknowledged without apology. "It's also ensuring that thousands more aircrew might survive this war." He slid a folder across the table. "I'll need all your signatures, of course." One by one, they signed the documents, formalizing the fiction that would become historical fact. In the weeks that followed, the Winters method, as it became known in classified circles, was refined and expanded. Production facilities were established to manufacture the additive in quantity. Modification kits were dispatched to bomber bases across England. The results were transformative. Bomber loss rates plummeted from an unsustainable 20% to less than 5%. The psychological effect on German defenders was equally significant, as their previously unassailable radar network suddenly seemed vulnerable. The Luftwaffe scrambled to understand what had changed. Captured Allied airmen were intensively interrogated about new radar countermeasures. German scientific teams analyzed radar performance data, seeking explanations for the sudden degradation in effectiveness. By August 1943, The additive system had been incorporated into the Allied strategic bombing campaign. Combined with the introduction of window, strips of aluminum foil dropped from aircraft to create false radar returns, it created an electronic warfare revolution that the German air defenses never fully overcame. For security reasons, the true nature of the Winters method remained highly classified. The official explanation given to most aircrews was that they were deploying a special type of radar jamming equipment. Only the pilots and navigators who actually operated the system knew the truth. In September 1943, Winters was summoned to a small ceremony at Air Ministry in London. In a room with only 5 other people present, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation made no mention of his chemical innovation, referring only to exceptional service in the development of radar countermeasures. After pinning the medal to Winters' uniform, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, the commander of Bomber Command, spoke quietly. "The official history may never record what you actually did, Flight Lieutenant, but those of us who know the truth will never forget it." "Thank you, sir," Winters replied. "But it wasn't just me, there were others." Harris nodded. "Your team has been noted. Promotions are forthcoming." He paused, then added, "Sometimes the most effective weapons in war are those the enemy never discovers." By the end of the war, the chemical additive system had been used on more than 3,000 bombing missions. Conservative estimates suggest it saved the lives of at least 7,000 Allied airmen. Yet because of its classified nature, its contribution remained largely unknown outside a small circle of RAF officers and scientists. Thomas Winters returned to Cambridge after the war, completing his doctorate in chemical engineering. His thesis on high-altitude particulate behavior made no reference to his wartime work, though those who knew the truth recognized the connections. Sarah Mitchell continued her career in intelligence, eventually joining the newly formed GCHQ, Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency. The analytical skills she had honed during the Radar Countermeasures project proved invaluable in the emerging Cold War. David Cohen returned to academia, becoming a professor of applied mathematics at Imperial College London. His work on dispersal patterns formed the basis for several important post-war developments in meteorology. Walter Cooper established his own engineering firm specializing in aviation systems, becoming one of Britain's most successful post-war entrepreneurs. Group Captain Harrington retired from the RAF in 1952, having risen to the rank of Air Commodore. He never spoke publicly about the unauthorized experiment he had tacitly permitted, taking that secret to his grave when he died in 1968. As for the forbidden fuel additive itself, its formula remained classified until 1977, by which time radar technology had evolved far beyond the systems it was designed to counter. When finally declassified, it was studied by aviation historians as one of the war's most innovative improvisations. In his later years, Thomas Winters was occasionally asked about his wartime service by students or colleagues who had heard rumors. He would usually smile and deflect such questions, saying only that he had done a bit of chemistry work for the RAF. But on rare occasions, speaking to fellow veterans who understood the true cost of the air war, he would acknowledge the moral complexity of his achievement, a chemical concoction born of desperation that had saved thousands of lives while remaining, officially, forbidden. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the Winters method came from a German radar operator, who after the war wrote in his memoirs about the mysterious period when Allied bombers seemed to vanish from their screens. "It was as if they had discovered how to make themselves invisible," he wrote. "We had the most advanced radar systems in the world, yet suddenly they were rendered almost useless. It was then that many of us first understood that Germany might lose the war, not through lack of courage or skill, but because the enemy had somehow mastered the invisible forces of physics in ways we had not imagined possible." The story of how a desperate chemical engineer, a precise mathematician, a determined intelligence officer, and a practical mechanic came together to change the course of aerial warfare remains one of World War II's less known but most significant innovations, a testament to how ingenuity and courage could triumph even in the darkest hours of the conflict. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, read it. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.